Welcome, builders of the internet! It's Big Energy Saving Month, so I thought I would talk about sustainability and construction. Specifically, 5 of the common misconceptions there are about constructing buildings sustainably. As always, you can find my timestamps and sources in the description.
Is building on my mind.
Myth number 1. Sustainability is only to do with the environment. There are hundreds of definitions of sustainability and sustainable development, which are broadly to do with environmental management. However, the idea of sustainable development was first articulated in 1987's Brundtland Report from the United Nations. This stated the definition as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. This definition captures economical and social well-being, as well as environmental considerations. What this means is that for a development to be truly sustainable, it needs to take into consideration the economic side, where communities can maintain their independence and have access to financial and other resources that they may require in order to meet their needs. Developments should still be capable of generating increases in wealth and provide jobs for people so that there is still monetary benefit for living in these types of areas. In terms of the social well-being, sustainable developments need to provide basic necessity to provide for people's human rights, meaning that people should have enough resources to keep themselves, their families, and their communities healthy and secure. Ideally, in sustainable development, there is improved education, equity, and fair treatment for everyone, so that people feel safe and that they can live at peace with one another. This is one of many definitions, but probably the most widely accepted for sustainability. But as you can see, there is so much more to sustainability than just being good for the environment and conserving resources. It can be such a complicated but important matter that so many people are working towards. Myth number 2. If you want to live sustainably, you have to go off-grid or dramatically change your quality of living. Sustainable homes are not just all new buildings that are self-sufficient with their energy production. They can come in all shapes and sizes, including retrofitting, where existing buildings are improved to be more energy efficient. There are simpler systems that can be installed, such as solar panels or water systems that can help you reclaim and reuse water so it doesn't have to be reprocessed. As well as this, there are many small changes that we can implement to our own lives that may not necessarily affect our living standards. One example of which is turning off appliances and switches that we're not using, rather than leaving them on standby. And we can also look at the energy efficiency of appliances before we choose to buy them. In the UK, white goods such as washing machines have energy efficiency ratings that tell you how good or bad the machine is in terms of its energy efficiency. I know that house buying, particularly in the UK, can be an incredibly complicated, expensive and arduous process, where it doesn't seem like there are too many affordable options if you wanted to live in a sustainable development. But there are many different ways that we can adapt our lifestyles, apart from what I've already mentioned. Sometimes things that are more expensive in the short term, such as clothes made of natural materials, can last us longer period of time, which saves us money in the long term. For clothes in particular, there are an increasing number of companies that are offering lifetime guarantees on their products, and by donating your old clothes to charity shops can be much better than keeping them out of landfills and reducing the demand for new clothes. I could harp on about the sustainability and ethics of clothes all day, but this is a construction video, so I'll move on to the next myth. Myth number 3. Low carbon designs always means lower energy bills. Although these are often seen as parallel to each other, there is a difference between carbon emissions and energy consumption. Whilst, yes, sometimes you have low carbon features to your home that produces less carbon, the overall energy bills can end up being more expensive if you're not careful. Carbon is one element that is more heavily monitored, but there are definitely other emissions that usually don't get accounted for. For typical non-domestic buildings, a sustainable development manager at Wilmot Dixon has said that unregulated emissions account for between 30 to 50% of energy use, often in the form of electricity, which is more expensive than heat bills. Regulations in the UK only cover emissions to do with the base building, rather than considering that of all the appliances that are functioning inside. So it's important to consider the whole picture of where money is being saved, rather than just focusing on one element. One thing I would recommend is that if you are planning on installing systems and appliances into your homes for sustainability purposes, perhaps consider carbon and other harmful emissions that can come as a result of producing the materials, such as solar cells. It's also useful to evaluate how many emissions you'll save during the product's lifespan in order to determine whether its installation is beneficial for you. There is a lot of inefficient solar panel technology that may not necessarily save you the money or emissions that you expect, and within say 10 to 15 years, you may need to start doing repairs and replacements. Myth number 4. Sustainable building is more expensive than traditional methods. When talking about the prices of sustainable buildings, it can be such a complex matter that can be disputed about so much. I've just told you that because you have a lower carbon design, you may not necessarily save money on your energy bills. But that isn't to say that green buildings are always going to be more expensive. In a survey of over 700 construction professionals, around 80% of the respondents thought that higher initial costs was the biggest obstacle for green building. There are various studies that prove otherwise, and nowadays there are plenty of examples where building sustainably and innovatively can cost less money than traditional and conventional construction methods. For example, the San Francisco Federal Building saved around $11 million in mechanical cooling, and the total construction cost was around 13.5% below the market average. There are different degrees of how comprehensive a green building project can be. More extensive projects can include fitting in new systems, say ventilation heat recovery or solar panels, which can show more cost benefits long term, whilst less comprehensive projects may include reusing existing buildings and materials, which shows less initial costs whilst still conserving resources. In the end, the cost for sustainable developments is dependent on factors such as the materials chosen, the contractor that's doing the work, or the current market rate, and there is so much more beyond this. Provided you have competent and qualified people with a similar goal in mind for the building process, there doesn't always have to be larger bills for green projects. The last myth I'll talk about today is that building sustainably can only be done with optimum weather or environmental conditions. There can be the false notion that sustainability cannot be achieved in some circumstances, maybe because some installations for green building are pretty heavily dependent on the environment and the weather. For example, there are solar cells, which are dependent on the sun or light, and turbines can be dependent on water flowing through rivers and using wind. It can be much more complicated than that, I think, but too much detail to go into for this video. Yes, it may not be feasible to install every available system into your house, but there are likely going to be some improvements possible. There could be utilising draft excluders or having thick curtains that reduce how much heat transfer takes place between the inside and the outside of the building, or maybe having some water retention or ventilation systems. Some locations may be ideal for perhaps living off the grid and not being dependent on electrical and water services, but they may be far out of reach to nearby civilizations, which impacts the social element of sustainability. Sometimes, living in a small apartment in a populous area where everything is conveniently located, you cycle everywhere and you minimise your energy consumption, this can be better for the environment than simply living out in the middle of nowhere and needing to drive everywhere to get anything. There is definitely a lot of consideration that needs to be made for sustainability in construction, and the ideal solution for one project may not necessarily be the right solution for the next. Definitely try and think of the whole picture. What is omitted in producing the materials for your projects? how much transport is required, both in the construction phase where building materials needs to be brought onto the site and whilst the building is in use. The construction industry is a big contributor to carbon emissions, producing around 40% of the UK's total emissions, so encouraging more sustainable development and considering the whole picture could really be beneficial. That's all I have to say about construction for now. I hope it helped to build on your mind.
Thanks for watching this channel, it's building on my mind. Check out my other videos, but first hit the bell and comment, like, subscribe.